Welcome to the Femininja Project. I am your host, Cheryl I Love, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the Femininja Project. Welcome to another episode of the Femininja Project, and thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you. And today we have a fascinating guest who's going to talk about some of my favorite topics: neuroplasticity, mindfulness, and just being able to succeed by expanding on these ideas. Her name is Divya Parekh. She is the founder and owner of Mindfulness Works Everywhere. Reveal the masterpiece within. She is a business positioning coach, influence mastery advisor, and speaker. She is also a scientist, biotechnological professional, global business relationship and leadership coach, as well as a former university associate professor. Divya skillfully merges her biopharmaceutical career with her extensive experience as a coach, author, consultant, and speaker to make a positive impact on people, which led her to develop effective evidence-based leadership and partnership programs. Divya, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. I really appreciate it. And it's an honor to be here with you because I've had conversations and you're such a wonderful human being.
Oh, thank you so much. And so are you. You have had a fascinating career and an incredible background. So why don't you share that with the audience?
My life started out in trees. And you may say, were you a chimp when you were young? You could call me a chimp or a monkey. My mom hated she would dress me up in these wonderful dresses with those pigtails. And of course, I'd be pulling those pigtails and just climbing trees, getting in the bushes and tearing my clothes, scraping my knees and my elbows. And I'd be taking my notebook and book up in the trees, writing books, reading books. So as the life moved on, I stopped writing the short stories and poems that I used to write, but I continued reading. And I was fascinated by nature. I was fascinated by science and by people. That what made people do what they did. And I've been just an observer of nature, and human beings are part of nature. So as I evolved, I got into biochemistry, which is chemistry of the body, including brain. And so fascinating that our brains, amygdala, which is lizard brain, within less than that of a microsecond in presence of a trigger, it can trigger chemicals that has got a whole physiological loop. I don't want to go into the gory details, folks, but long story short, that complicated piece of machinery can control our whole lives and how we live. So going from there, my life meandered through research labs and university halls and pharmaceuticals. And then finally I went into entrepreneurship because I wanted to have a direct impact. In 2008, when people were laid off, even though I was enthralled and I knew that my job was meaningful in biopharmaceuticals because we were bringing life-changing medications for the patients in the end. And yet there was not that direct connection. So I moved into coaching and business area in writing books and helping other people write their books and bring their message to masses because it's all about storytelling, folks. Because when I share with you what made that shift, and when I share that story, it will stick with you rather than, oh, I was in corporate world and now I decided just to move into entrepreneurship. I put a plan into place and I moved. That doesn't stick. That's like, okay, what the heck are you talking about? How dry it is. So from there, the key thing was, folks, at the bottom of anything and everything is two things: intentionality. Why are you doing what you're doing? What's your why? So as I mentioned, while I was in university as an associate professor, I used to love seeing students blossom. If necessary, I would even have office hours after my classes, a whole lot more. And just to see them come into their own. Same thing in biopharmaceuticals. As I was working with people, seeing them blossom, seeing their potential just pop out. There's nothing more phenomenal than a human being coming into their own, claiming their stage, standing on it, owning it, and shining the light for others. So that has been the core intention or core value of my life, and that has helped me. And second thing is coming from a place of integrity. It really helps, and it doesn't have you think twice when you're making your decisions. And here I am sitting with Cheryl and with you.
I absolutely love the image that you present of that little girl just tearing out the pigtails and taking off the dress and running outside to climb up the tree and spending time in nature, because I think that that's really where we find ourselves. And that's really where we learn about ourselves, is through nature and by exploring. And I just love that. So thank you for sharing it. That's part of your storytelling. I didn't realize that you were a master storyteller, but I think you are, because then when you were telling the story about the chemistry of the brain and how that changes and influences our entire life, the way you were presenting this information just made me want to learn more, rather than, oh yeah, okay, I know all about this, brain chemistry. But it's just beautiful the way that you present this information. So do you tell stories when you are teaching or coaching, or when you are teaching your students in university, or when you're coaching your students or your clients?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Yes, I love storytelling, and it goes back and it originates from the time, as I had mentioned, that I used to love reading books and stories and mysteries. And I used to love mysteries and reading poems and all that, because storytelling sticks. That's all I can tell you. And you can take a dry subject and share the story, because if you have not, somebody else has traveled down that road before. And somebody else is going to travel down that road again. Mm-hmm. And when you share it in a form of a story, so for example, I can share something of one of my story about one of my clients that was so caught up. This gentleman, he was so caught up in that why his boss was always after him constantly. That, oh my goodness, okay, he is interrupting me. He is not listening to my ideas. I feel taken for granted. I feel disrespected. And all these things were showing up. So these are the stories we tell ourselves. It's not only for telling the stories to others, but it's about the stories that you tell yourself. Talking, and I asked him that, okay, let's take a look at what you're telling yourself. Just observe yourself for 3 to 4 days. And he took notes, and he found out that he had something negative about each and every person. That, oh, they did this to me, they did this to me, they did this to me. So now what you're doing is you're training your brain. So brain is designed to suffice, not to optimize. And when I mean suffice, it means automaticity. Brain will learn to find patterns and make it into habits. And you may not even be aware of. And he came back for our next session and said, oh my God, Divya, I did not realize this is what I was doing. So we are in this session, and I asked him, okay, what could you do? He said, I'm just going to observe myself again. Mind you, he's coming up with the solution yourself. He went through the next week again. We were meeting weekly at that time. And he said that sometimes my boss would be talking and I would interrupt and say whatever was in my mind. And then my boss would tell me, hey, listen, let's finish this train of thought. Let's finish this and we'll come back to it. And of course, I never went back to it because I felt slighted. I felt that my idea was not being given attention to. So these are the simple things that we can put into place with our brain. And what it does is neurons that fire wire together, folks. So if you keep on doing the same thing repetitively, that's how you're going to be acting. And that's why we call it self-fulfilling prophecies and self-sabotaging acts. So best way to go beyond that is just finding something new that interests you. Don't worry about the old habits. Doing something new again and again until it becomes a habit.
Mm. So it's all about self-awareness and self-talk, especially for that one client. But I find that with a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years and even now, and even in myself, and I really get caught up in that. I have to catch myself and say, wait a minute, that's not the truth. That's not who you are and what you are. So I have to redirect my own thoughts, my own thinking, and my own self-talk, because self-talk is a really powerful force. You can use it for the power of good, or you can use it to destruct or destroy yourself.
You said it. Self-awareness is the first step. And then awareness is also how do you talk to yourself? Because think about it. How many thousands of thoughts we have throughout the day. And now if you're continuously telling yourself, oh, why did you do this? So for example, you're sitting in a meeting, or even if let's say you're sitting with a potential client. Oh, you haven't made money. And who are you to go and coach somebody else? You haven't, let's say if you're a first-time person getting on a podcast. Oh, you've never spoken before. Who are you to get on this podcast? So you're telling yourself these stories, and think about it. Have you not spoken to people? Have you not been in a setting where in Thanksgiving where you have shared a story with a group of friends? So this little or this big, you have done that. And what happens is that when you are not telling yourself the right story, you're discounting all the experience and skill sets, everything that you have. And what happens is that now, okay, now you're aware of self-talk. What's the next thing? Action. And that's where I always call it mindfulness in action. So critical. When mindfulness is in action, you're influencing yourself and you're influencing others.
Well, that was just so beautifully said. And I just keep going back to that self-talk and the stories that we tell ourselves and tell other people about ourselves, and then about the speaking. And I have a friend of mine who's a business coach, and he always will show when he does a presentation, he'll say, people ask me when I started speaking. And then he shows a picture of himself on the screen when he was like 2 or 3 years old. He says, I've been speaking, most of my life. And we all have, but we don't really give ourselves credit for that. And the other thing is, we have so many accomplishments in our lives that we forget about, because I think that every person is so unique and so gifted and so fascinating in everything that they've accomplished in their life. But that person, the individual, really doesn't think so or doesn't realize it because they've lived that life. And, I'll talk to people on my podcast when we're getting ready to do a show, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you have done so much with your life. This is so impressive. And they say, really? I just don't think I've done that much at all. So how do you get your clients to realize the accomplishments that they have achieved in the past, and to use those successes and even their failures, because failures are very important. A failure is just an opportunity to learn. How do you get your clients to recognize that and then capitalize on it to take them to the next step in their lives and their business?
Great question. So when we talk about failures, those are teaching moments. The way I see it is there's no failure. Every experience is a teaching moment, whether you're successful or you're not. So let's say if you're successful, what did you do well? If you did not achieve the outcome you wanted, what did you not do well? Or what else could be done? So life is nothing but a teaching moment. So what we do is, we sit down and we tell stories. And I'll say, okay, just tell me your life story. I don't ask them what you've accomplished, what you've not accomplished. And as they tell me their story, I'm taking notes, and we have an agreement that it's okay with them for me to stop. And let's say they would say, let's say when I was a kid. So for example, even though my mom was upset at me and I tear her precious frocks, I did not care. I wanted to go sit up in there, beautiful tree. Well, it wasn't beautiful, it was all barky and everything. But still, to me, just that rustle of the leaves and feeling that canopy of green and the sunlight filtering and seeing the sparkling stars through those leaves, this thick tree, it was a magical place for me. So as they share their story, and I'll say, oh, wow. And then they realize I don't have to tell them what they have achieved. It is bringing back the mindfulness and self-awareness of how much do they have. All I'm doing is holding a mirror for them to see the greatness I see within them. Mm-hmm. When you're aware of what you've accomplished, and then when you're aware of your why, your life purpose, because life purpose is the fuel that drives you to get out of the bed, that becomes the springboard for your success. It's passion, purpose, performance will automatically follow. And when you're performing, prosperity and results are just the side effects. They're just the byproducts.
The other thing that I thought was fascinating was when you were asking your clients, like, well, what did you do well? To me, that's even like tiny little successes, tiny little baby steps. Everybody's looking at the end result or the big picture or this huge success or this huge accomplishment. And every tiny little step leads to where you want to be. You don't have to start out with something huge. I mean, I made a pretty good dinner last night. That was a huge success. So I did that well. And I had to own that because I've been cooking every day for the past year and I get kind of bored with it. So even little things like that make a difference.
Absolutely. Think about it. You are not pulling something out of the freezer, putting it in microwave and heating it up. You're cooking. You're going out there, making an effort to create that list. If not a list, you're going to grocery store, you're getting ingredients, you're making the time to cook for yourself. That's an accomplishment. So that's another thing that I share with people is that look at your efforts, look at the process. And that's where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness mastery is being in the moment. And when you are in the moment, you see that it's not a destination, it's a journey. And when you're traveling, you'll see that you do a lot. Nothing is like, okay, just spend 2 minutes here, just spend 10 minutes here and 5 minutes here, and things will happen. Just like it takes time for a fruit to mature and ripen, same thing, it is for you as well. I mean, of course, you can surround it with liquid nitrogen and make it ripen like faster. But what I found is that naturally ripe fruits are much sweeter than artificially ripened.
I love all of the analogies that you're using about trees because I love trees. And where I grew up, we had so many trees in our yard, including a lot of different variety of fruit trees. So I think that's amazing. I love hearing that story. But I also love the story about the tree that you always went to. It was such a beautiful tree, but in reality, it was kind of like gnarled and old and ugly, but you saw the beauty in it. And, everything, if we're looking at it through the right lens or with the right perspective, everything is beautiful at, every age and every stage. And it's just looking for, I guess, the shining moments, the sun coming through the leaves and the sound of the leaves and the wind and that type of thing.
You said it. It's what lens are you using to view the landscape of your life?
And I also really liked the comment you made about the grocery store, about making a list, just sitting down and making a list, because a lot of times I sit down to make my grocery list and it's like the worst writer's block I've ever had. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's just a grocery list. And sometimes I just need to put it down and go do something else and then come back and look at it anew or from a fresh standpoint.
Absolutely. Or you can be a creative like me because I'm a creative person along with being a logical person. When I'm in grocery store, I have a list for maybe this is what I'm planning to eat in this coming week, I could make that. And then I probably come back with half the ingredients. And then just, okay, it's half the ingredients. So then I'll create something new, which may not be as good. And it's okay. So it's basically, folks, whatever works for you. Mm-hmm. That's how I see. Because everybody's so unique. You can take somebody's formula, but the key is to make it your own.
Mm-hmm. So now I'm wanting to ask you, we're going to segue from the making a list, because of course that's sitting down and writing, is you are a prolific author. How many books have you published?
I think so, probably around like now 14, 15.
Oh my goodness, that's just amazing. And I know the topics that you write about are pretty fascinating and they really resonate with me. So I just want to touch on a few of them, if that's okay with you. My favorite topic is the mindfulness mastery. And you've already talked a little bit about, well, talked a lot about mindfulness, but talk about the mindfulness mastery and how those two words go together.
That's fantastic. So when we talk about mastery, it's mastery is for today, you've achieved a mastery in something. But again, that learning continues and you're continuing to master it. There's never stopping. So one of the things that I want to bring you to mind is, would you be okay to play a game with me very quickly?
Me? Oh, of course.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you something and I'll ask you an answer in return. So let's say if there are numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, what will be the next number?
11.
Okay, so now see what happened was our brain thinks in patterns. It's okay, it's all odd numbers. We are skipping 2. I did not say what you have to do. I did not give you any rules. I did not say anything, but automatically your brain jumped to the conclusion that the next number would be 11. So that becoming a master in mindfulness is figuring out what are your biases. And folks, if you're thinking, oh, I don't have any bias, I gotta share with you that you do probably have at least 1 or 2 biases of your own, because as we saw here, it's just how our brains think. So basically, folks, mindfulness mastery comes is becoming aware of your biases as to, again, seeing your patterns. So as I talked about the stories that we had talked about, how you're talking. So my client had this whole complete image about his boss, which was rooted in facts that were not facts. Mm-hmm. It was rooted in assumptions. So the key is for you to understand that when you're looking at a lens, what meaning are you giving to the situation? What meaning are you giving to somebody, what somebody said? Mm-hmm. Because always remember, it's never about you. That person is most likely involved in their own process, in their own quagmire. Everybody's got so much going on that maybe something is going on with them and then they're coming out to you. So for example, I want to share a story with you. So one of my wonderful friends, and she's a person who works with me, phenomenal woman. One day something happened and she cussed at me and she had totally lost it. And it was very clear that it was directed to me. And of course, I was deeply hurt because this is a person I've known, I respect, and I love. So I was hurt in that moment, and it felt like it was directed towards me. Then we said that, okay, you know what? Why don't I just walk away? Right now is not the time I can talk, because I didn't want to come out and say something that would just kind of hurt her back in return or something like that. So we walked away. And then she sent me an email, a beautiful email sharing what had been going on. And in case if she might be listening, I'm not at liberty to share, but there was a lot going on in her personal life. Mm-hmm. And what happened was that her capacity to handle that situation exceeded what she could provide. So her coping mechanisms were this much, and the stress was this much. So that energy had to get transformed. Folks, law of physics, right? Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed. Now it can be created into negative energy, or it can be created into positive energy. Mm-hmm. So I could have said a few choice words of my own. Mm-hmm. I didn't. I took that, I acknowledged my hurt because it's important to acknowledge what you're feeling. At that moment in time, I felt hurt, I felt disappointed, I felt betrayed. It was okay. Now let it run its course. And because I let it run its course, this is again mindfulness mastery, giving yourself the same compassion and love as I was extending to her to understand where she was coming from. And a few days passed, and I was able to forgive her and move beyond it. So that is mindfulness mastery. And if you think that you're done, like, oh, I'm ready for the next event, if you are, good for you. I'll just kind of share with you, I'm perfectly flawed and I'm continuously learning. If you're there, more power to you. But mindfulness mastery is that going within, understanding your own biases, understanding biases of other people, where they're coming from, understanding they are human beings. And yes, that does not mean you condone it. We did have a conversation, we set boundaries that, listen, we work together, but if this happens again, there is going to be this X, Y, and Z. So just because you're accepting someone, just because you're loving someone, just because you're being kind and being forgiving doesn't mean you are setting the grounds for them to step on you or you are becoming a doormat. No, no, no. You're becoming stronger because now you're able to see things more clearly, and then you're able to create those framework of mutual agreement, where basically what you're doing is you're throwing the ball back in their court and asking them that, okay, this happened. I understand why it happened. What if it happens again? What shall we do? You're letting them figure it out. You're empowering them rather than just holding that hurt, or this was just one example, or holding that bias, or holding that story, or holding that doubt. Think about it. If we all did that, rather than, oh, that person did that, we blame others. I mean, don't get me wrong. I can get started on some politicians or some things that I don't like, and then I pull myself back. Okay, what if I were in their shoes and I had gone through exactly their same journey? Would I be doing the same thing or not?
Right.
So it's kind of checking in. And if you can say that you're completely without bias and you're not, so hey, kudos to you. Yeah. But for me, I still have to check myself. Like, it will be a beautiful. So I'll just share another story that it has been beautiful here in North Carolina, 70 degrees for the past few days, enjoying. But now we have got cherry blossoms out and pollen out and allergies. Oh my God. I cannot tell you how miserable they make me. So I love opening up the windows and all that, but I can't open up because allergy meds have been giving me a lot of side effects. So I was complaining today in the morning to somebody. And then immediately I watched myself and said, oh, here I am. I had been complaining just a few days back, oh, how cold it has been. It has been such a long, wet winter. So that's about checking in with yourself. That's what mastery is. And then taking action.
That is so powerful. You know, just all of your stories and just the message of how we can handle conflict in a way that can be very productive and healthy, but still setting boundaries. And like you said, if everybody would learn how to do this, imagine we would have a completely different world than what we do right now. And it's really funny. I had lunch with a friend of mine recently, and she started talking about something, and it was, of a political realm. And she said, I'm sorry, I just hate that person so much, I can't think of anything else. And I had to kind of rein her in. And I said, okay, if that person knew how you felt about them, how would it affect him? Would he care? And she said, well, no. And I said, well, who's getting hurt by this? And she just kind of looked at me and she said, I see your point. And I says, you don't have to approve of anything he does. You don't have to like him. Just don't hate him. And I said, it's bad for your complexion. Just don't hate him, you know? So it's right. It's just being aware and that mindful awareness. And I think some people listening might think that that's incredibly exhausting, but it really isn't. It's just changing those pathways in the way that you look at things. So I think this probably just segues or is just maybe another component of the next one I wanted you to address, which is emotional intelligence. Because how could you have emotional intelligence if you don't have the mindful mastery?
Mm-hmm. You said it. So awareness is a key component that's common to both mindfulness and emotional intelligence. And of course, emotional intelligence has like four other things, which is part of your own understanding of your own emotions, understanding others' emotions, and regulating your emotions, and then understanding the other's emotions and building that relationship. I'm just not going in details, but how you kind of pull it together. And if you kind of think about it, if you step on a side and think about it, it's just about having common human courtesy. So I always say that how we use WD-40 for hinges that are creaky, or for I always recommend use RWD, which is respect, warmth, and dignity. So when you are meeting someone, yes, they have not earned your respect yet, and still what you could do is that they're a human being, they've got a intelligence, they have had their experience. Just by that token,
Mm-hmm.
you give them the respect and speak to them with warmth, rather than, okay, somebody calls you, let's say, even if the solicitors call you, think about it, there's somebody probably getting paid like $7 an hour, or even, I don't know, $10 an hour, and they're doing it day in and day out, and everybody's just rejecting them, and they're in that job because probably they don't have anything else. So I always tell them that, hey, thank you for calling me. First of all, sometimes I don't pick up the phone, I'm going to be honest. Sometimes we put a block so those calls don't get through. But let's say in the event when, if I'm talking to them, I'll say that, hey, thank you for calling. Listen, I'm not interested. Please take me off your list. So what you're doing is, you don't know them. It doesn't matter. It's still a human being. They're not doing it probably out of choice. If they had a choice, they wouldn't call because they already know that somebody's going to reject them. So think from their perspective. Just be nice and say goodbye and say, hey, have a good day, and give them that dignity. Create a space so they can afford to have the dignity of being a human being. And when you use that principle, here's what I'll tell you is that, automatically emotional intelligence and mindfulness will come into your action.
I have to wonder how many times a day those people doing those calls hear somebody say, thank you for calling.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Because think about it, and it's, again, I would say if somebody's in that position is also to think about their customers, because they are being bombarded by robocalls and spam calls. So both the sides, if they understand, it's just creating that space. It's the same thing with, think about grocers. They're standing there on their feet, and then we are like, okay, you know what, this is a long line. I want to come to the cashier. You do it fast, and I want to be out of the store, even whether there was COVID or no COVID. So just creating that space when we talk about mindfulness and emotional intelligence, even when you're walking down the street, just a simple wave. And even if you're wearing a mask in a store, smile does show through, folks. Here. So just hold that space for the other person. And if you're in grocery stores and there are multiple people, hold that space. And you could do a simple kind act. Let's say you see somebody who's in a rush. Maybe it's a mom who got to get back, or it's somebody who are just like that. They got to rush through. Let them go first. Simple things. Smile at them and go through. You are talking with the cashier. Hey, how your day is going? Thank you. for being here for us so that we can take groceries during these tough times. Because think about it, they're getting minimum wage and they're out there. We try to go in and get out. We have got a lot of folks have the option of having contactless delivery or getting food from the restaurants. So many restaurants have gone under. So for example, profits from my book go to kiva.org, where we help entrepreneurs who are impacted by COVID-19. So think about it. So it doesn't matter where you are at. One of the things that I have been proposing for past couple of months or maybe more is that if every one of us just gave 1 hour a month, 1 hour a month unconditionally to do something for someone. And if you don't have that 1 hour, folks, if you were just to give a smile to everyone you're passing by, and you can add that 1 minute over that whole period of time, it will make a difference.
It's almost like putting pennies in a little piggy bank,
Right?
You don't miss that money. I mean, it's just, maybe pocket change. You throw it in a little piggy bank and you just don't think about it. It doesn't take any effort. You don't miss it. And then, 1 month later, you can go out to dinner with what's in that piggy bank. So little tiny acts of kindness really do add up. So the other topic I want you to discuss a little bit with us is the appreciative inquiry.
So appreciative inquiry is a long process. I'm just going to kind of share it in brief that it's a process where you're open to questioning, where you're opening up yourself to understanding where the other person is coming from. And it's a process where you ask questions. And goes back to asking questions from a place of appreciation, asking questions from a place where you're inviting people in a meeting to participate, where you know that everybody has a voice, where you're making sure that you are not just talking the talk about diversity and inclusion, but you are including. Now, that could be even at home when you're having a family dinner. Maybe a couple of your kids may be like, oh gosh, having just a simple rule that, when we are having family dinner, we are going to put the phone aside. Just asking them, not just about the day, but just opening up for conversation. So appreciative inquiry is a guided process where you ask people questions in a way that invites engagement, participation, and builds trust.
So, Divya, how can people get a hold of you?
So they can reach out to me on any of the social media. I am on Instagram, which is at make your message a movement. I'm on Twitter at Coach Divya. On Facebook or LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, Divya Parekh, or you can reach out to me through my email, contact@divyaparekh.com. Please be sure to include in the subject line, if I'm able to serve or support you, heard about you from Cheryl's podcast.
Oh, that would be awesome. Well, you have given us so much fantastic information, wonderful, incredible tips, and most of them were in the form of a story. And that was just terrific. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And do you have any last pearls of wisdom that you want to share with the listeners before we go? As I said, you've given us a lot to think about and a lot of really great tips that we can start implementing today, right now, small steps.
Well, the tips is find how you can help others. Even when you're living your day-to-day life, that's one thing I would say is that think about somebody else. And what I found is that when I'm thinking, how can I help others? All my woes and my obstacles seem to melt away.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks again so much for being here, Divya. I have just loved having you on the show. You are amazing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You are amazing as well, Sharon.
Oh.
Really appreciate it.
And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you, and I know Divya does too. So make sure you do check out her website, her social media, and do check out her books. And remember to be careful what you tell yourself. just be careful of that self-talk. Just start practicing some self-awareness and lead that on into some more emotional intelligence. Pay attention to other people and consider what they might be going through. Spread some happiness, give everybody a smile, say hello, and before you know it, the world's going to be a better place. And that is the way of the Femininja. And that's a wrap on another episode of the Femininja Project. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.